Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
And one of the podcasts I listen to interviews authors of academic books, Caribbean academic books about the Caribbean. This particular episode was called Comrade Sister, Feminist Perspectives on the Grenada Revolution, and it promised to revisit the Grenada Revolution through a feminist lens. The author, as she was being interviewed, starts out by laying out the trajectory of the revolution. Ousting of the old guard, charismatic leader, wonderful community programs, and then the US invasion that ended it all. Said, hold up, what happened to the part about the internal political crisis in the New Jewel movement that led to the murder of Maurice Bishop, that charismatic leader, and 7 other people? I'm here to talk about false narratives and the price we pay for accepting them and allowing them to inform our understanding of the world and our expectations of the future. It was Mark Twain who said, "Never let the truth get in the way of a good story." But stories that are untrue, especially the big stories that we tell about who we are and how we got here, prevent us from forging futures that are informed by facts, reason, and truth. Stories necessarily contain the past and often use interpretations of the past to understand the present and to communicate the values and goals that inform the future. In the case of a country like Jamaica, we use stories to define ourselves and our identity as a nation, as a people. Those stories are often contested and compete for dominance and credence. I work for a public policy think tank that does evidence-based research on the developmental problems that hold Jamaica back. CAPRI emerged out of a 2-year research project that sought to answer the question, why hasn't Jamaica fulfilled its developmental potential? Why haven't we done as well as we ought to have? The common narrative, the usual narrative, the flawed narrative is that we were victim, mainly to the IMF and the CIA. If you've seen the movie Life and Debt, you'd know this narrative very well. It represents it and portrays it very well. But the research found that our thwarted developmental trajectory was a result of poor policy decisions that we made. We responded to external events and internal events and dynamics with particular policy decisions that thwarted our development. Other countries with a similar potential faced those same kinds of dynamics and made different decisions and had different outcomes. The problem with the false narrative is it disempowers us from doing better. If we place ourselves as victims, then we have accepted that we have no control over our own future. But if we accept that we made bad decisions, the corollary to that is that we can make good decisions and we can create a better reality for ourselves. By the way, the name of that research project, which subsequently became CAPRI's motto, is taking responsibility. How and why do narrative fallacies happen? People naturally construct narratives to make sense of their world. To think in terms of stories is fundamentally human. Good stories provide a simple and coherent account of people's actions and intentions and past events. False narratives come about when we weave isolated facts or near truths into explanatory patterns leading to conclusions and ascribing explanations that are just not real and are usually unprovable. They give us stories that make us feel good about ourselves. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys, and by the way, the good guys won, and we beat the bad guys. But it's difficult for stories, and this is especially true of the narratives that we hold on to about who we are and how we got here, to account for complex or nuanced situations, events, or actions. History's not neat. The good guys are never all good, and the bad guys are never all bad, if you can even fairly figure out who the good guy and who the bad guy is. But good stories resonate with us. They align with the opinions we already hold and support the values and truths that we hold dear. And so it's easy for a story that reinforces pre-existing beliefs to become true, even when it's easily disprovable with clear evidence. There's another thing that happens. Repeat a lie often enough, and it becomes the truth. It's actually a name for this phenomenon because it's a proven phenomenon, the illusory truth effect. Let's consider the story about Lady Musgrave Road. For most of my life, I knew that the story of Lady Musgrave Road was that it was built to appease the envy, the resentment of the wife of the governor, Lady Musgrave. George Steeble, who was Jamaica's first black millionaire, had built the most beautiful mansion in all of Kingston, right there, Devon House, still there. She didn't like that. She didn't like the idea that a Jamaican was doing something so magnificent. And so she had the road built so that she didn't have to pass by it and see it, so it didn't arouse her resentment. The problem with that narrative is that Lady Musgrave Road was built 80 years before the Musgraves were in Jamaica. The other problem with that narrative is that the road was renamed Lady Musgrave Road after she left Jamaica to honor the work that she did with the Jamaica Women's Self-Help Society, out of which the women who fought successfully for the women's right to vote came. But that narrative persists. We have a saying in Jamaica, if it no go so, it ne'er go so. No, we have to reject that. If the story that is being told is incomplete or a straight out lie, then the future reality we are working towards is informed by untruths. The false narrative blocks the possibility of accessing the true source or causes of the problem, and that forestalls us solving it. CAPRI did a research a few years ago, trying to understand how the community of Augusttown were able to achieve having 0 murders in 1 year in 2016. The community has a long history of extreme violence with a very high murder rate, but in 2016, there were no murders at all. We wanted to know, as a public policy think tank, how did they do this and how can we replicate it, because this is a problem that Jamaica faces. Communities throughout Jamaica face this problem. We took a very clinical approach. We were not previously engaged in Augusttown. We were not stakeholders in any of the efforts that had gone before to achieve 0 murders. Augusttown was one of the first communities in Jamaica to have a peace treaty between gunmen and the authorities and the state. But we want to know how it happened, how it could be replicated. The narrative that we heard and that we went by when we started the research was that the community came together. And it was community unity that overcame that force, of that evil force of the murder, of the high rate of murders, and they got to 0 murders. But what we found was that narrative could not be substantiated, and that there were other explanations for 0 murders in Augusttown in 2016. The most plausible was that some of the most lethal violence producers were not in the community during that year. As it happened, the worst of them had been locked up by the police over time and were all out of the community during that period. The patterns of murders resumed in the very first week of January, and they coincided once those violence producers, those murderers, the most lethal, had been released from jail. Many people were very unhappy that our report questioned the dominant narrative and that we offered other explanations for how 0 murders happened. Groups that were accustomed to controlling the narrative and were invested in that narrative for various reasons were upset. It was not our intention to upset that status quo, which as outsiders we weren't even aware of. We thought we were simply reporting an objective truth. But let us think about what it means to rely on a false narrative in this case. If community unity was not what brought about 0 murders, which is a very comforting narrative, then continuing to work for community unity as the solution to that problem is futile. The other narrative, that it was policing and incarceration, is far less amenable. It's not as nice to hear that. But if that's what worked, then it suits everyone to work with the truth. Most people are comfortable and invested in their chosen narratives, and they don't want to know that they're false. They may experience cognitive dissonance when faced with painful truths, truths that expose fractures in their belief systems. It's a discomfort that people feel when faced with conflicting beliefs. How do we avoid false narratives? It's not easy. We don't know what we don't know what we don't know. We build the best possible story from the information available to us, and if it is a good story, if it confirms our biases or is in line with other stories we've heard, we're more likely to believe it. We have limited information, and information that comes from a particular perspective. Much of it, the information we have about our past is told to support specific agendas, and is often presented as this is all there is to know. Even still, there are things we can do. Don't be an ostrich. Be skeptical. What kind of story should we be suspicious of? If it's neat and tidy, it's probably inaccurate. Often it's the narratives that make us feel justified in anger or resentment that are not quite true. The ones that make us feel proud of some kind of triumph over the bad guy. Narratives that excuse or are to be blamed for other questionable situations. Narratives that don't account for the complex, unintended consequences of human actions, or the fog that often obscures a clear understanding of an event or series of events. Those are the ones we should be wary of. Fact check. Develop the skills you need in order to evaluate evidence, to deliberate more broadly and more carefully, and to arrive at your own conclusions. A great way of training your mind to do this is to read books about how our minds work, like Thinking Fast and Slow, and books that challenge a dominant narrative or subvert the dominant narrative with credible evidence-based research, like Taki's Revolt. Do not ignore or explain away things that don't fit the narrative. Be wary when a questionable or unprovable narrative is repeated over and over again. Big warning sign. Get comfortable with discomfort and uncertainty, and be prepared for others to not believe you, to disparage you. They might even cancel you. False narratives are flawed stories of the past that shape our views of the world and our expectations of the future. Reality does not define itself. We do that, and we do it through the stories we tell ourselves, that we are told, and that are handed down to us. If we are to create a reality that moves us forward, a reality in which we can do better for ourselves and for others than what has gone before us, it should be informed by a story that is grounded in facts and objective truths, even if it isn't comfortable or neat or what we would wish it to be.